Welcome you to our special council meeting for Monday, December 15th. I'd like to call the meeting to order. We do have Councillor Mady is on his way and Councillor Guerin is here. He just stepped out to maybe use the bathroom or something. We acknowledge that this land is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples, and of the Huron-Wendat peoples. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and of all the original peoples of Turtle Island who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. Any declarations of conflicts of interest from members of council this evening? Seeing none, I need a mover and a seconder that we adopt the published agenda for our special council meeting for Monday, December 15th. Councillor Hammond, Deputy Mayor Shepley, any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried unanimously. We will move on to reports from administration, and I will go directly to Ms. Jabbour, our Manager of Planning. Welcome.
Welcome. Through you, Madam Mayor. Tonight's special council meeting is to consider general amendments to the Town of Essex zoning bylaw, bylaw 1037. I'm just going to give Ms. Lozon a moment to pull up the presentation. Thank you. Next slide, please. The purpose of this meeting is to hear comments from the public related to the proposed amendments. Council is not going to be asked to make a decision on the amendments at this meeting. Next slide, please. Thank you. So to begin, we will explain the purpose of a municipal zoning bylaw since these are amendments to the municipal zoning bylaw. Zoning bylaw 1037 has been the Town of Essex's zoning bylaw since 2010. Under the Planning Act, council is permitted to pass zoning bylaws to regulate how land or buildings may be used and the types of buildings permitted to be constructed in certain areas. Zoning bylaws may also be passed to regulate lot sizes and to prescribe building standards such as how tall a building may be and its minimum distance from a lot line. And a zoning bylaw may also be used to regulate other elements of development, such as minimum parking standards for certain uses. Thank you, Ms. Lozon. As I was saying, we will describe the proposed amendments beginning with changes to Section 7 of our zoning bylaw, which is the section respecting definitions. So firstly, the definition of a hotel and motel is proposed to be amended to clarify what self-contained cooking facilities mean. These facilities are not permitted in hotel or motel suites under the current definition for a hotel or a motel. To assist planning staff in enforcing this regulation, the definition needs to be amended to define these facilities as any permanent appliance for the preparation of food that requires an exhaust system, such as an oven or stove. Therefore, a self-contained cooking facility would be defined as that. This amendment would help clarify that other appliances, such as fridge, microwaves, even hot plates, would be permitted in hotel and motel suites, but ovens and stoves would not. Secondly, we are seeking to change the definition of a gas bar, and we are seeking to rename it as a motor vehicle fuel station. The term gas bar isn't representative of the other types of fuels that may be dispensed at these facilities, such as diesel, electricity, hydrogen. Changes to the definition represent and encourage modern and alternative fueling stations such as EV charging stations. Next slide, please. Thank you. The next set of amendments pertain to Section 8.15 of the zoning bylaw, and this is the section regulating additional dwelling units, or ADUs for short. As a reminder, and there's some graphics up there on the slide for you, ADUs are second or third residential units that can be added to or within existing homes or in a detached building on the same lot that contains an existing dwelling. And these can be permitted in urban or agricultural areas in the town of Essex. The first change is to add a regulation for ADUs in agricultural areas, which clarifies that the main dwelling is the house that existed on the lot prior to the construction of the ADU. This clarification is needed because we have regulation that says the ADU cannot be larger in floor area than the main dwelling, and we have regulations that describe how many ADUs can be constructed based on the number of dwelling units that already exist in the main dwelling. It's important to note that this regulation is already in place for urban lots, but it's not in place for agricultural lots, therefore the need for the amendment. The second change is to permit a maximum lot coverage of 45% for a residential lot where an ADU is proposed. This regulation is only applicable to residential lots in urban areas. Lot coverage is the surface of land occupied by buildings or structures. This change is required because Ontario regulation requires it, which means we must recognize it in our zoning bylaw. There are some residential zoning districts in the town of Essex, specifically the low density R1.1 zoning district, that prescribes a maximum lot coverage of 40%. So this change would expand that allowance, and it would also alleviate the need for any minor variance. And the third amendment this servicing matter is already addressed under the water supply bylaw, so there is no impact to operations. Next slide, please. So the next set of amendments pertain to our parking space regulations, which are found under Section 11 of our bylaw. And the first change is to revise the minimum parking regulations for dwelling units in combined use buildings. And combined use buildings are those buildings that have both a commercial and residential component. And the proposal is to change the park. So currently for a combined use building, the parking requirement for a dwelling unit is 1.25 spaces per dwelling unit, and 15% of the total number of spaces needs to be devoted to visitor parking. So the amendments would prescribe a minimum number of parking spaces now based on the bedroom count versus just the number of dwelling units. So for example, a 1-bedroom unit in a combined use building would require 1.25 spaces. If there was a mix of 1 and 2 bedrooms, a 2-bedroom would require 1.5 spaces. And if there was also 3-bedroom dwelling units, a 3-bedroom would require 2 parking spaces. So the changes would be more representative of the actual parking requirements for that dwelling unit because the number of bedrooms usually prescribes how many people would normally occupy the unit. Visitor parking would also be amended to be 0.15 spaces for each dwelling unit rather than a percentage of the total parking area. So in terms of impacts, obtaining visitor parking based on the number of dwelling units will ensure there is more parking spaces devoted to tenant parking. Again, the proposed parking ratios would match what already exists for multi-unit buildings. The amendments should have been addressed when we amended the parking regulations for multi-unit buildings, but there was an oversight at that time, and the amendments for combined use buildings weren't included. And the next change under Section 11 is to exempt parking regulations for new commercial buildings and the downtowns of Essex and Harrow in what are called parking exception zones. This change has been proposed in response. The zoning bylaw currently exempts parking requirements for existing commercial buildings in these zones. The intention of our zoning bylaw is to create more walkable and commercial-oriented streetscapes, especially in our downtown. And this is accomplished by exempting new commercial buildings from parking regulations. So the exemptions would only apply to certain commercial uses. They would not exempt dwelling units from providing parking if they're proposed downtown. So there would be no impact from those types of uses. There are very few vacant infill commercial lots. We estimate that there's probably 3 in downtown Essex and 3 in downtown Harrow. So the impacts of this regulation change is expected to be minimal. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the next set of changes is to our residential regulations. And the first is to remove a semi-detached dwelling as a permitted main use. On County Road 50, on the south side of County Road 50, east and west of the hamlet. And for those of you who aren't aware, a semi-detached dwelling is essentially a residential building, but it has 2 dwelling units that are connected by a common interior wall, and each of those units are split on their own separate lots. This amendment to this regulation would not prohibit semis in the village of Colchester. The village of Colchester is a settlement area, and all types of residential uses are permitted. This would only be on County Road 50, east and west of the village. And the reason for this change is because the official plan does not permit semis in these areas, and our zoning regulations have to be consistent with the official plan. Next are changes to the minimum setbacks that are required between a residential building and a side lot line. So currently, if a house is constructed without an attached garage, your side yard setback on one side has to be 3 meters, and on the other side, it can be 1.2 meters. And the intent of this regulation is to allow you space to park a car in the side yard in the absence of an attached garage, which is supposed to serve as a parking space. If there is an attached garage on the dwelling, then the side yard setback can Next slide, please. Thank you. So our final set of changes are miscellaneous changes because they don't fit in any one particular 3 readings and a 20-day appeal period will take effect. They can choose to provisionally adopt the bylaw for 1 or 2 readings, where final readings will be reserved for another council meeting. They can defer the decision on the bylaw if more information is required, or they can deny the bylaw where a 20-day appeal period will take effect. I just want to note at this time that as part of the report and presentation that was provided for this meeting, we did draft a draft bylaw that actually helps showcase red line revisions to the changes for the public and for council's consideration. And any bylaw we bring to you in the future will follow that draft bylaw, and we'll make any necessary amendments after this meeting if necessary. That is the end of our presentation, and of course, we're available for comments or questions.
So to members of council, I'm going to see if there's any members of the public that wish to speak so that we can see if there's any members of the public. Are there any members of the public here that wish to speak this evening? Okay. Mr. Andrew, can you please go back to the delegation stand, turn on your mic, and you have to say your name and your address, and you have 5 minutes.
LaSalle. I guess my only comment with discussion of adjusting the side yard setbacks, has there been any talks of possibly adjusting the rear yard setbacks?
And through the mayor, those weren't considered as part of these amendments.
Okay. Thank you. So for the rear yard setbacks, anybody can still just go to the Committee of Adjustment? Okay. Members of council, I have Councillor Hammond.
Do you, your worship, read at the beginning, you mentioned that the additional dwelling units weren't going to be held to one specific hookup or whatever. Is that correct? So would that mean like multiple meters and stuff like that to accommodate a separate hookup for an additional dwelling unit?
I'm going to take this question and I might pass it over to my colleague, Mr. Gerard. So there currently is a regulation in our zoning bylaw that says that an ADU is only permitted to have one connection. So it has to connect from the house. There aren't going to be separate connections allowed. It's not possible to have that regulation in a zoning bylaw because we have a water supply bylaw, we have a development standards manual, we have other means to address how ADUs are to be serviced. So we're going to remove that regulation because it doesn't belong in a zoning bylaw, but that regulation is still going to be in place because there's other Town of Essex bylaws that address it.
Elaborate.
We're doing a good job of describing it. Our water services bylaw kind of duplicates this right now. So when we brought that after the zoning bylaw, we did include verbiage in there. So we don't have to amend the water services bylaw to incorporate that. It is already included. So this is really just a housekeeping item, but the regulation won't change and the practice won't change.
Thanks through the chair. The parking for residential, we increased to 1.25 for 1 bedroom, 1.5 for a 2 bedroom, and 1.7 it's 1.75 for a 3 bed or 2 for 3 bedroom. Why did we choose 1.5 per room and then for the first room and then only increase it by 0.25 for the second? Why not just go to 2?
Mayor, through you to Councilor McGuire-Blaise. So the regulation at the time was brought forward to council in the form of a report when we were directed by council to review parking regulations for multi-unit residential. The review was based on best practices standards across the industry. The report does give some insight into the housing type being condo or apartments as we see them. What we're proposing, however, is an oversight that we're just correcting in that the regulation had changed at a time for only multi-unit residential rather than combined use buildings. We would see it as an apartment with ground floor commercial. So it's just simply matching what was presented and approved by council at the time. The basis, we can certainly recirculate that report to council. The basis was based on, the revision to the regulation was based on the standard for square footage, the size of the units, and the number of bedrooms.
Through the chair. Okay, so this is not for a house or semi-detached. This is strictly for an apartment building. What is the plan for a house, for a residential home or semi-detached? What is the plan?
Thank you. So council just directed administration back in October. If you recall, there were two separate motions. One motion specifically related to parking exceptions for those new construction in downtown that you see before us in the housekeeping amendment for council's decision-making in January. The report to council that administration directed us to prepare prior to a zoning bylaw amendment for singles, semis, townhomes, et cetera. That report is targeted for spring of 2026. And the reason being was there are, and as mentioned at the council meeting when that direction was prepared or was rather provided, was that we needed an opportunity to provide council with information on what regulations, what parking requirements could or could not be amended. And so this avenue allowed us to provide you with a report prior to amending the zoning bylaw. Tonight, what you see here is preparing you for that zoning bylaw. It has been initiated, and so we needed to provide you with a separate report for single semis in town.
Thanks through the chair. I would like to see that report, but I'm wondering, can we not apply this bedroom rule to residential units now and then get the report again and amend it in the spring when we have a full report? I don't want to wait another 8 months before we have a report and have all these homes come through and get approval with one car per house for a 4-bedroom home.
Mayor, that was not the direction. The direction was to provide you with a report and to clarify why some units, such as ADUs, we could not, the town council, any municipal council in Ontario cannot provide more than one parking space for ADUs. For a single unit dwelling, we're also ensuring that we are reviewing the housing type and the number of bedrooms required. That information is coming forward in the form of a report. We have a draft of the report to be completed by January, considering other competing priorities, and of course, the direction having just been received in October.
Council, at this point, Councillor Guerin?
Here to admin, just I don't see anything in here about bachelor pads or bachelor units. I'm assuming it's considered a 1-bedroom, but is there no language in there that stipulates a bachelor unit?
There is for a bachelor unit. I believe it's 1 parking space for the bachelor unit.
And do we get any applications for apartments that are new builds that want to include basements? And do they have to define at the application whether they're going to use that basement for living space, bedroom, or other?
So in a combined use building, all dwelling units have to be above the ground floor. So we haven't received any applications of that type for basements. But in the instance that we do, they need either a minor variance or a zoning bylaw amendment, and they would have to specify the number of units, the type of units, just as they would for anything above the ground floor.
I just have a couple questions myself. Mr. Boer, can you just specify a little bit more the lot coverage comment where it's an Ontario regulation? Does that mean the Ontario government is saying that we have to have this lot, such and such lot coverage?
So the Ontario government has a specific regulation that provides standards for additional dwelling units that are above and beyond a municipal zoning bylaw. And those standards a municipality must comply with. They can't make standards through their zoning bylaw that are less than Ontario regulation. So for example, this requirement that you can't ask for any more than one parking space for an additional dwelling unit, that comes from Ontario regulation. The requirement that you can't ask for anything less than 45% as a maximum lot coverage, that comes from that Ontario regulation. So yes, that is a regulation that was passed by the government of Ontario, and it is the minimum standard for additional dwelling units.
Just, so that Ontario regulation doesn't speak to back setbacks, rear yard setbacks. It does or it doesn't? Please.
Thank you, through the chair. It does not currently.
For the roadside stands in Pleasant Valley, do you know if they will go through a site plan process? Just because I'm quite familiar, I think most of us are, with Pleasant Valley, and what I foresee is if somebody's parking on the side of the road, that would really worry me. I would hope that they would have to pull into their driveway. I really don't want people parking on Pleasant Valley to go to a stand. I'd hope that they would pull into the driveway. Do you know if they would be parking on the shoulder of the road? Because there really isn't much.
Here again, roadside stands, they're not subject to site plan control. But we expect that we're going to duplicate the regulations for a roadside stand in Pleasant Valley the same way that we would regulate a roadside stand in the agricultural area. And in that case, the roadside stand would be allowed to be 75 square meters in gross floor area. That's the maximum area. But it would also have to have a minimum setback of 30 or 9 meters, 30 feet from the highway, from the road. So there would be ample space for someone to pull in and park.
Now not going to be mentioned in our zoning bylaw, but if there are additional dwelling units that cannot hook up to the main water, is there a mechanism for them to get a second water hookup? Because I think I heard about one in Essex Center. Or is that if you can't hook up to the main water, you can't?
So do you mean like for an ADU? I mean, we do review every ADU application individually. So if somebody did come to infrastructure services looking for a water service where they could not utilize the existing service, we would review it and provide an additional service if needed. The idea is really just to avoid the duplication of services where they may not be needed, and which would be an additional cost of the town. So, so each application is reviewed on a case by case basis, and we would provide additional servicing if it wasn't practical or possible.
Provided that additional service, we could charge that water. We would charge that water hookup that we have.
Through the chair, we wouldn't be able to charge like a buy-in fee or the service fee because they have already paid for that fee with their current service, but they would be responsible for all costs related to the actual installation.
Questions from members of council? Seeing none at this time, looking for a mover and a seconder that the planning report be received for information. Councillor Hammond, Councillor Guerin. Any other question? All in favor? That's carried. And looking for a motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor Shepley, Councillor Verbeek, any questions? All in favor? And that's carried.